I don't need to tell you that when it comes to building a dedicated home theater or media room, a lot of enthusiasts turn to AV receivers. Why? Because they're simple, relatively speaking. But every year around this time, receivers become a hot topic, and a debate rages over whether or not you should wait for the new models to drop or buy the current models that have all gone on sale. Well, this time last year, we were promised a whole slew of 8K, 4K, 120 receivers from the likes of Denon, Marantz, Yamaha, and others, only to discover that their 8K, 4K, 120 claims, well, they may not work, or at least not work as advertised, ever. So if 8K, 4K, 120 isn't happening for the foreseeable future, would you not be better off shopping for something tried and true? Well, we're looking at one such receiver in the Sony STR-ZA2100ES today, so hit that like button and subscribe, and let's get into it. Before we jump into this review, you no doubt have seen the footage on the news of these incredibly long lines of less fortunate people waiting to get food. And that just shouldn't happen in this country. So I want you guys to know that for the next couple of weeks, Christy and I are helping to raise money for Feeding America, because there are people less fortunate than us, and we just have to do something. So I hope that you will join us in donating to Feeding America. You can click donate right off to the right side of your screen, and you should know that 100% of your donation goes directly to Feeding America. And Feeding America's entire mission is just helping individuals with food insecurities all over this country. It's a worthwhile cause. Please join us in contributing whatever you can, and let's help some people have a good Thanksgiving. Now, on with the review. The 2100 rests in the middle of Sony's ES line of AV receivers. ES, for those of you that don't know, stands for Elevated Standard. And as a result, the receivers from Sony have long been a staple for custom installers and higher-end home theaters. Now, the 2100ES has a power rating of 105 watts per channel, but that's only with 2 of its channels driven. Sony does not give a power rating all channels driven, but we know from past experience that it isn't going to be no 105 watts. The 2100 is a 7.2 channel receiver, though it can decode up to 9 channels, as it has a pair of preamp outputs, which can be assigned to power rear height channels if you want. It supports Dolby Atmos as well as DTS:X, and is even IMAX enhanced for the 3 of you who care about that whole thing. It supports ARC as well as EARC, and has 6 HDMI inputs and 2 HDMI outputs. The Sony can accept and upscale video signals up to 4K 60, which is still more than enough of a flex for the majority of you. It even has support for HDMI pass-through if you prefer your receiver to be little more than a video switcher. What it doesn't have is Wi-Fi or any real streaming support whatsoever. So no Bluetooth, no AirPlay, no Alexa, no Chromecast, no built-in Spotify, no Tidal, no nothing. So why on earth are we talking about it? Because what it lacks in features, it more than makes up for in performance. The 2100 is clearly aimed at the installer market. It features a fairly simplistic face with only a power button and volume knob visible. There is a large magnetic plate that hides all of the receiver's manual controls, and this keeps unknowing owners from tampering needlessly with their settings. Now, this is normally where I would begin to break down the ins and outs of the 2100ES's control app, only it doesn't have one. You can connect it to your home network via Ethernet, and you can configure it via a web browser, but that's more of an installer thing and not so much a customer one. Thankfully, it has the same graphic interface that we have come to love in our Sony 1080. The 2100ES's menu is a little bit more robust in terms of customization, but for the most part, the two are the same. The menus are very comprehensive, easy to use, and feature a fair amount of explanation so that even novices can get up and running quickly and confidently. The 2100 has Sony's Auto Room calibration software, which I happen to like. To this day, its user interface and speaker configuration screens are some of the best in the business. Sony offers a lot of phantom surround modes, which are fun to play with. Who knows, you may even like one of those settings, but for us, we went with more traditional setups. Speaking of setups, we tested the 2100ES on two different systems. First being our budget reference Jamo 5.1 system, though we substituted the S809s on that for our left and right mains. The Klipsch 8000F towers and matching 600C were the stars of our 3.1 setup. We used the same Jamo S810 subwoofer for both, and then we connected the 2100 to our LG 8K TV via a single HDMI cable. We relied on our new Chromecast with Google TV device for streaming television and movies, and our Acrylic S50 Pro handled all of our music playback through Tidal. Now, I was skeptical that it would be possible to discern a difference between our 1080 and the 2100 with respect to sound quality. Those reservations were quickly put to rest about 2 minutes into our first movie. While the differences aren't what I would describe as absolute night and day, they are nevertheless audible. The 2100 is more balanced, less forward, and still just more confident throughout the frequency range in direct comparison to the 1080. It still has Sony's trademark dynamic and lively sound, but it also sounds far more refined and less outright excitable. As a result, you're just going to hear finer detail with a greater sense of spaciousness from your loudspeakers than what you're probably used to coming from a receiver such as the 1080. Breaking it down, the Sony's bass response is lightning quick. A sub is required for subterranean bass, as the receiver's power isn't quite enough to extract absolutely everything from the 8000F's dual 8-inch drivers, but it gets close. The Jamo S809 proved no problem for the Sony, but then again, the Jamos aren't exactly a beast in terms of bass, especially when compared to the Klipsch. When the Sony reaches the limit of its capabilities, bass does become a little bit rolled off and one note. So cross your speakers over with a subwoofer or two, and I doubt anyone's going to notice or even run into this issue. In the bass department, the Sony inches towards greatness, but isn't quite as refined as, say, the NAD T778 or an integrated amplifier like the Musical Fidelity M5SI. Minus that, the bass is incredibly articulate, rife with detail, and has that dynamic slap that I just love. If you watch this channel, you know I prefer bass to be more responsive or dynamic over just being deep, and in this regard, the 2100 delivers. I find all Sony receivers to be rather clear when it comes to their mid-range performance. Dialogue is always front and center and intelligible with Sony receivers, and the ES's mid-range in comparison to the 1080 manages to add a greater sense of weight into the mix. Vocals and dialogue retain that signature Sony detail and presence, but now they just have better grounding and dimension. Vocals also have better scale, even through, say, smaller centers like the Jamo C81. This added weight imparts a sense of warmth to dialogue and mid-range elements, though I still don't believe that I would classify the sound as outright warm or lush. It's not boring or lifeless the way some more neutral components can be, but it isn't overtly forward or brash either. Highs are where I see the biggest improvements. They are far more composed than those from the 1080. At high volumes, the 1080 can become a bit aggressive when paired with the wrong speakers. The 2100 does not seem to have this issue. Like its bass, the high-frequency performance inches towards perfection, though at the extremes you can still definitely tell that it is a receiver and not a dedicated amp or integrated. At its limits, the high frequencies do lose a bit of texture and air, though they don't become brittle or fatiguing the way they can on the 1080. But within their limits, they are something else, very nimble, detailed, and completely balanced with the rest of the frequency response, as opposed to being too pronounced. Dynamically, the 2100 is fantastic. Like I said earlier, it slaps, only there's some added weight to accompany that sting. As a result, there's just more meat on the bones to every explosion, body blow, and crescendo, and I am here for it. The same is true of the soundstage, as it is just boundary defying. The 2100 does favor width over depth, but the detail throughout is exceptional. Center imaging is so good, so solid, that you would swear that the center speaker was active during 2-channel listening. Additionally, surround sound movement front to back and side to side is seamless. In truth, and it took me quite a bit of time to put my finger on it, but the 2100 is a lot more like a surround sound integrated amplifier than, say, a do-everything receiver. It lacks almost all of the bells and whistles a lot of receivers, even some from Sony, will give you, and yet I think that's what makes the 2100 timeless. While there are definitely receivers that do more, for example, have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, AirPlay, etc., these are all things that either A, stop being supported, or B, that you guys complain about not wanting or needing in your receivers in the first place. Well, the 2100 doesn't have them, and I'm not really that upset about it. Okay, I do think that Sony needs Bluetooth at a minimum, but I can live without built-in music streaming or a fancy app. And the same is true when it comes to video. I don't know when AV receivers got together and decided they also had to be video processors, when video switching will suffice. If anything, it's the fact that companies have continually felt compelled to do video processing that has landed many of them in hot water with respect to their new receivers, specifically these new receivers that have 8K, 4K, 120 capability. But for those of you who are shouting, yeah, but when those HDMI boards are fixed, Andrew, the truth is the 2100 is no better or worse than the current crop of AV receivers with respect to video, as most people aren't diving into 8K at present. And second, a lot of you don't even game at 4K 120. So rather than try and be the first out of the gate, maybe it is better to be on team steady as she goes. All that said, I hate that the 2100 doesn't have at least stereo preamp outputs for its left and right main channels, let alone preamp outputs for all of its channels. To get that, you need to step up to the 3100, which costs $300 more, but I do consider preamp outputs to be worth the jump in price. And for those of you with locally stored music on, say, a NAS drive, you may be better suited with the 3100ES as it features an 8-port gigabit switch. I also don't like that the 2100ES lacks a phono stage. For a $1,400 receiver that does go out of its way to tout its stereo performance, I do think that at least a cheapy phono preamp should be present, even though this is decidedly a home theater product. So where does that leave us? Is the 2100ES better than Sony's own 1080 receiver? No. Sound quality-wise, the 2100 is the better receiver, without a doubt. And the differences aren't subtle, but the 2100 simply isn't the insane value the 1080 is, nor does it give you double the sonic performance. So better, yes, but twice as good? No way. Like hi-fi products and integrated amplifiers, the 2100 asks, how much is that last 10 or 20% worth to you? At $13.99, I don't think the 2100ES is overpriced given what it brings to the table, but it's not cheap either. But reason stands that a larger portion of the 2100's capability will be able to be used and enjoyed for years and years to come, whereas aspects of the 1080's feature set may one day be stuck in time due to hardware or firmware limitations. This is what makes the debate interesting. Do you want your receiver to do everything, or do you want it to only do some things, but do them well? If you fall into the latter group, the 2100 is still worth a look. So the question is the 2100 the ES receiver to get? No. If it were me, I would get the 3100 ES over the 2100. Both are going to be the same in terms of sound quality, but the 3100 is going to give you that added flexibility in the form of preamp outputs that I believe are worth the added jump in price. Compared to the NAD T778, I still prefer the NAD over the Sony, but seeing as how the NAD is almost 3 times the price, I better. But once the movie is playing and I can no longer be wowed by the NAD's interface and touchscreen, I'm not going to say the NAD is a runaway winner over the Sony. Better, yes, but could I be happy with the less capable Sony for 1/3 the price? Absolutely. And as for the Yamaha 3080, this one is actually a little tougher for me. I love me some 3080, but I appreciate the simplicity of the Sony. The 3080 is the better receiver, all things considered, but like I said in that review, it's overkill for my needs. So this one really has me torn. If I could merge the two, I would, but it's hard for me to pick a winner here. So in the end, the Sony 2100ES AV receiver is a great receiver for those of you looking for a simple, easy-to-use surround sound solution that isn't likely to be rendered obsolete. It's not a value champion the way the Sony 1080 is, nor is it necessarily the best ES branded receiver. That distinction falls to the 3100ES. But if you don't need your receiver to do everything short of make you coffee, and you know that you're not likely going to play with outboard amplifiers, well then the 2100ES from Sony is definitely worth a look. So that's it. That is our review of the Sony 2100ES AV receiver. What do you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, my question of the day for you is this. Do you agree that older receivers are still good enough to stick with, or is there a new receiver on the market that you just have to have right now? And if so, which one is it? I want to know, so let us know down in the comments. And just a quick friendly reminder, please do help us to raise money for Feeding America by clicking donate and giving what you can before you go. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Christy left for you down below, know that that is a great way that you continue to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both Christy and I thank you very much. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for today. So remember, the only person that has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next video. Bye. So the question is the 2100 the Sony ES receiver to... What?
Holy I just gave you the reading.
All right, what? Say it again.
I need to say it again?
Yeah. You need
so the question is...
So the question is
the 2100 the ES receiver to get?
So the question is the 2100 the ES receiver to get?
No.
No, it's not.
It's not. If it's me, I'm getting the 3100.
So the question is the 2100 ES the ES... What? That's what it is.
I know.
I know.
Listen to me. Listen to the words coming out of my mouth.
Give it to me, Finch. Give me a line reading, Finch.
So the question is the 2100 the ES receiver to get?
Your answer.
No.
What would you get?
I wouldn't get any of them.
What would you get?
Yamaha.
Which one?
The pretty silver one. I know
That's
it's
not a home
integrated.
theater. That's not a home theater.
I know.
You can't have home theater.
I know you can't.
Uh-huh.
We don't care about that. If I want home theater, I'm putting up the Sennheiser Ambio. That's my final answer.
Boom!